program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the Eau Claire Area School Board.
Joining us tonight. Maida, can you confirm that we're in compliance with open meeting laws?
Yes, we are.
And if you would conduct a roll call, please.
Commissioner Lyons.
Here.
Commissioner Nordin.
Here.
Commissioner Zur. Commissioner Vika.
Here.
Commissioner Clements.
Here.
Commissioner Harder.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Thank you. Those who are willing and able, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First order of business tonight is the adoption of the agenda. We'll hear a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? We'll now move on to our recognitions. Superintendent Johnson.
Good evening, Chair Nordin, board members, executive team members, and guests. We have two recognitions tonight. First, I'd like to start out with last month, several district high school students attended the Midwest Artist Academy, which is a camp founded by Memorial alum and current UW-Eau Claire Associate Professor B.J. Hollers in partnership with UW-Eau Claire. Midwest Artist Academy was held at the Pablo Center and focused on 5 areas of art, allowing 10 students entrance into each area. Because of our partnerships with UW-Eau Claire and the Pablo Center, our district students had access to this amazing opportunity. His vision for the Midwest Artist Academy to life and allowing such an incredible opportunity for young artists. What I'd like to certificate as well. And after I share the second recognition, Maida will take our picture. We'll get a picture in here in the boardroom if that's okay. So on to the next recognition. I'd like to recognize Memorial High School baseball team and Coach Dan Rail, who's here tonight along with varsity assistant coaches. The team made it to state this year for the first time since '08. The Abes made it to the semifinals and finished with an impressive 22-8 season. Following the final game, several student athletes remarked that though they didn't win the championship, the season was about team building and having fun playing baseball with friends. Positive statements like that are a great example of our district mission to inspire and prepare our students to live creative, fulfilling, and responsible lives. Congrats to Coach Rail and the entire team and coaching staff for a wonderful season. Professor Hollers will go next here. However you wanna. You like it.
Perfect.
Thank
you.
So good. Sure.
It's all.
A football drill.
Perfect. Thank you.
We will now move on to our public forum. The board recognizes citizens that wish to address the board. Each speaker will be allowed up to 4 minutes, providing that they have information that we have not previously heard. The school board does not hear personal complaints of school personnel nor any person connected with the school system in a public forum. We do have 3 people signed up tonight, 2 in person and 1 virtual. Forgive me if I mispronounce anyone's name. And if you would please come to the podium here. You don't have to do anything with the mic, but that way we know where to see you. And if you could start with your name and address. First tonight is Kevin Renley.
This podium?
Yes.
All right, sounds good.
Gives us a place to
sit down just so you guys can hear me.
Thank you.
I set a timer too, just be conscious.
We'll cut you off. Yeah.
All right, good. So first and foremost, I want to thank you guys all for your time. I appreciate the public forum. I know it's a good opportunity for a citizen to come. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Kevin Renley. I have 2 little girls. One's a kindergartner and one's a 3rd grader. They go to Northwoods Elementary. trip down memory lane, my third grader, when she went to go to kindergarten. In August of 2018, she got a virus attacked her body, and it's basically affected her nervous system, which control all your parts and pieces, right? And so it left her right arm paralyzed, completely paralyzed. She can move her hand. It left her left deltoid very weak, and her neck muscles are very weak. But more importantly, it affected her respiratory system significantly. So going back down that trip down memory lane, we missed all of kindergarten. So we enrolled in first grade. I love the teachers there at Northwoods. They're awesome. I have nothing but good things to say about them. We get all the way to March of, 2019 in first grade, and damn COVID hits, right? And so, obviously we've been told with our doctors that if she does get COVID, it could be game over, checkmate. It could be nothing, right? We don't know, you don't know, I don't know, but it's a significant risk, right? So second grade comes, or we pull her out obviously in March of first grade. We do all second grade virtually. And all of a sudden the vaccines start coming out, and we start feeling good as mom and dad, we got to get Bailey back to school. Her name's Bailey, right? And it's important to get that social aspect for my daughter, right? Because she hasn't had one normal year of school. So with vaccines coming out, we're feeling pretty good about stuff. And, then all of a sudden we hear that there's a new variant, right? And who knows what the new variant's going to do. But a disheartening thing we found out is the school district decided, that the no mask policy, and maybe it's up for debate, maybe it's not. But I just wanted to come to tell you guys that I'm in support of masks. I know it's not a popular decision. There's probably I'm probably in the minority, right? I'm probably the 5% that don't believe in masks for kids. I know there's probably 95% that do believe in masks, right? Or vice versa, right? And I respect everybody's opinion, but I do want to come here with some of the facts. The facts are the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and Eau Claire County all recommend mask wearing, and they expect students and staff to wear masks. And I'm not saying it has to be one way or the other, but maybe we can create an either or scenario. Life's, we talk a lot about disparities in life, whether they be any type of disparity, but what about a health disparity? I mean, we have peanut allergies that say kids can't bring peanuts to school. Well, my daughter's got a significant respiratory issue that, ultimately could lead to some significant future problems. So I'm here in support of masks. I know it's not a popular decision, but I think it's something that you guys should reconsider as we move forward. Currently, our family got thrown in a deadline where we had to pull the trigger. And so we basically signed up for virtual school. That's not the best learning environment for my daughter. At the end of the day, virtual school is great. We did it a year, right? And now they're talking about, grade spreading where my third graders with the second graders. I mean, I just don't think it's the best. So I guess I just want to end with, I know, basically it's tough to make the right decision when it's unpopular. I think this is an unpopular decision, and I know I'm the minority. I stand up for the minority. I know I'm not the majority here, but maybe it's not an either or. We got, I don't know how many third grade classrooms. Can we make one mask? Raise my taxes, create another mask, right? You probably don't have many citizens, or create another classroom. You probably don't have many citizens come to you and say that. That's how strong I feel about getting my kid out of virtual school. So again, I respect everybody here. I truly understand as a business owner, it's tough to make unpopular decisions, and I respect that. I just want to stand up for the good. So I hit her. 4 minutes.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mark Goings.
Good evening, and it's good to be back. My name is Mark Goings. I live at E17450 County Road V in Augusta. Tonight, I'm speaking on behalf of the ECAE Executive Board. The COVID-related goal for this school year should be to have a safe, uninterrupted, in-person education for all our students in the least restrictive environment possible. The question is, how do we do that? Due to substantial transmission in our community, on Friday, the Eau Claire City County Health Department issued updated expectations. One point within the document states, all teachers, students, staff, and visitors to K-12 schools are expected to wear masks, even if they have been vaccinated. As a school district, we need to follow the health department's guidance. Based on Friday's statement, it's pretty clear that if the school year started today, everyone should be wearing masks. Back in June, my hope was that vaccination rates would continue to rise, infection rates would stay low, and that COVID would eventually disappear. Unfortunately, vaccination rates have stalled and infection rates are rising. Last year, our school district, guided by the health department, made what seemed like a million decisions on how to safely educate students through a pandemic. As COVID numbers changed throughout the year, we adapted our program accordingly. Also on Friday, in Friday's health department statement was, quote, unvaccinated people aged 12 and up should also consider getting vaccinated. This will make a difference. Currently, County Health cites a 50.9% fully vaccination rate. Obviously, the closer we get to 100%, the more likely it is that COVID rates go down and schools would be able to operate with little COVID interruption. This year, let's not simply watch the data and react. Instead, let's create defined action steps so that we can take back some of the control we lost through COVID. Let's unite our community in pursuit of a safe, uninterrupted, in-person education for all our students. In such a plan, rather than focusing on COVID rates and death rates, as those are lagging indicators, let's also focus on vaccination rates. Countywide vaccination rates could be a metric to both encourage and reward community safety. Let's use countywide vaccination rates to determine when, for example, mask wearing becomes optional, when outdoor events have open attendance, when indoor events have open attendance. As we work to meet the goals listed above, I'd encourage the district to put front and center on its website a COVID vaccine hotline, along with the current vaccination rate within the community. This would help our community see how close we are to that next threshold. Other examples, as our secondary schools reopen, we could work with county health and our parents to offer vaccination opportunities for our students who qualify. Ideally, these would take place within the school buildings. We could also look to mobilize our PTOs and PTAs to campaign for community-wide vaccinations. While specific percentages and indicators would need to be figured out, such a concept would empower the community by creating a roadmap to fewer restrictions. Every student, parent, grandparent, or community member who would prefer to go without masks has a way forward. Get vaccinated and encourage your friends and family to get vaccinated so we can meet our community-wide goals. Hope on its own has little chance of success. Hope accompanied with defined action steps can change the world. My hope is a school year.
Out of time, I'm sorry.
My hope is a school year without disruptions. Thank you, folks.
Cheers. We have one caller on our WebEx line, that is William Camp.
Will you hear me?
We can there at the end. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm just struggling here with the updates. So I hope you can continue to hear me. My name is William Kempf. I live at 1032 Violet Avenue. I have two children in the Eau Claire School District. They are both elementary students at Putnam Heights, and I'm mostly want to echo the comments from the first two guest speakers. I think that it is time for the strong opinions of individuals in the school district to sort of be put aside, honestly, though, and we need to listen to the experts. And all the experts are saying and recommending mask wearing, because while the vaccinations, for those who can receive the vaccinations, which is only people over the age of 12, while they're effective at preventing serious illness, the findings are now that they are not particularly effective at stopping the transmission, yet mask wearing and social distancing is. The first commenter who mentioned that it would be a great idea to have potentially mask classrooms for those parents who would choose to do that, I think is a brilliant idea, an absolutely brilliant idea. I think the disruptions that will come from not having masks to education this year will be enormous because the quarantines will skyrocket. The numbers in Wisconsin are skyrocketing. there are passionate opinions on both sides, and the reason why mandates haven't been implemented is because that's in the political realm. What's best for children is the recommendations from health experts, because that's in the health realm, and that's where we need to focus. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. At this time, we turn to our reports. Start with budget development. Commissioner Harder.
We have not yet met.
Thank you. And our legislative liaison, Dr. Johnson.
Today, the U.S. Department of Education released the Return to School Roadmap, a resource to support students, schools, educators, and communities as they prepare to return to safe, healthy in-person learning this fall and emerge from the pandemic stronger than before. The roadmap includes 3 landmark priorities that schools, districts, and communities are encouraged to focus on to ensure all students are set up for success in the 2020 fully vaccinated. All students older than 2 years and all school staff should wear face masks at school unless medical and developmental conditions prohibit use. Both the updated American Academy of Pediatrics guidance and the updated CDC guidance apply regardless of vaccination status. The CDC cited new information about the Delta variant's ability to spread among vaccinated people who are more protected against serious illness or hospitalization than the unvaccinated as a reason to update its masking recommendations. While COVID vaccines are considered highly effective, so-called breakthrough cases among fully vaccinated persons are still possible, and new data indicate persons with breakthrough cases can still transmit the virus. Several legislative proposals have been introduced that target public schools, including independent charter schools, with measures aimed at increasing transparency to parents and the community. The Wisconsin Association of School Boards is concerned with the trend of these types of bills that indicate a lack of trust by lawmakers and locally elected school board members and local control of K-12 education in general. The following is a list of bills dealing with school referenda, budget transparency, anti-racism and anti-sexism instruction, and a mandate to
And I think related to that is, what occurs throughout that K-12 tapestry in our portrait of graduate work. Fourth would be how we quantify the measures of learning for the whole child. It's difficult, it can be perplexing to assess, but ensuring that our assessments work and measure in a balanced format. And finally, defining what these mean to our students and to continue to solicit continuous feedback in order to prepare for ultimately post-secondary success. So I just wanted to share that with R1, with my interpretation and what I had gleaned from your comments and further reflection on July 19th.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. Any comments or questions for Superintendent Johnson? So in preparation actually for OE 14, I was reviewing the art of governing coherently to find out what are the appropriate motions or how do we handle this as we move into this phase of it. And what they recommend, what Linda Dawson and Randy Quinn recommend there is a single motion. I think with OE1, we did a motion to accept it and then a motion to affirm it. They recommend just doing it all at once. So the motion, for R1 would be to accept and affirm. At that time, and with any of the rest of these, it would then become ours to discuss. And if any board member felt that, a portion did not comply, this would be more applicable to OE 14, and we'll talk about that a little bit, or others of that have the full monitoring report. That's when we would amend it to exclude portions that the board did not accept. So anyway, the motion tonight for R1 that we would look for then is a motion to accept and affirm R1.
I'll motion to accept and affirm the monitoring report for R1.
Second.
All right, any discussion on the motion or amendments to the motion?
Call the question.
Question's been called. Ameda, this is an affirmation, so I think we can do this just by a voice vote. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you, Ameda. If you could note that for our reports, and one of my responsibilities as the board president will be to write a summary of statement for each of the monitoring reports as we go forward, and I will have that in. Our next monitoring report is OE 14. That is Emergency Superintendent Succession. This is our first full monitoring report. I will first turn it over to Superintendent Johnson to discuss the summary. As you can see already, Superintendent Johnson believes that the district is compliant with this operational expectation. And then we'll talk about the process to accept and determine the board's evaluation of the district's performance on OE 14. So Superintendent Johnson.
Thank you. Once again, very good discussion on the 19th about this. I guess somewhat apprehensive or a little strange to be talking about superintendent succession when you're the person sitting in that chair. However, in gleaning from other districts, as I mentioned before, with coherent governance, it was a little bit different than R1. But with DeForest and Chippewa Falls and Sun Prairie, I tried to take kind of the best in the things that we discussed a little bit with our present incident command structure. So I interpreted it as such, and that had not changed. However, I did want to add the succession structure, obviously, to be able to show. And the reasons why I had done that were because of when I had started here and I had learned from Dr. Hardebeck and from other members of the executive team about the incident command structure. If I were to be gone, either physically or mentally capable, where that process would stay true and stay consistent with what had been engaged in March of 2020 when COVID had started. I was impressed when I came on board in July to notice the organization, the communication between section leaders and the people in their stead, as well as the incident commander structure, the leadership structure. So ultimately, I wanted to keep that consistent because we do have many of the same people in place, so there'd be that understanding. Now, over the course of the year, hopefully this never has to be, adjusted. But if got to this point next year where I would definitely be able to share, here's why. Based on maybe other districts' situations, or unfortunately if something happened here and we found that we should change. But one thing I'd like to note, I do want to share, because we have the 2021-22 school year, we have the commander structure. In case, once again, if I'm gone for quite some time, physically or mentally incapacitated. But I wanted to put on there, for the 2021-22 school year, the specific executive staff members, and obviously that would change every year with these reports. But I wanted to share that, I don't want people to assume that because I do not have two members of the executive team on this, is that, well, those positions are not important, or the significance or the need for the position, because it is not specifically included as part of the plan. With finance section leader being Abby Johnson, and you've got staffing lead, Kay Marks's position when you're supervising, when you're really responsible for 1,400 plus employees, that's a significant amount of work and responsibility. And the same would hold true with Dr. Zhang in her position. When we have the SEL division lead and special education and student services, those are two major parts of this. And I just wanted to share that. If people, or if the board were to question, the board has not questioned, but I would like to go on the record publicly about that. There are many things we learned based on the structure when we had started our planning for COVID in 2020 and all the way to start the school year. But I just wanted to ensure that we were consistent with that. It's vocabulary that our system leaders especially would understand, and that what they were used to throughout the last part of the 19-20 school year and into this past school year as well. So that's really all I have to share. I would take any comments or feedback.
Well, we'll do comments or questions for Superintendent Johnson and Dr. Johnson. I see you've got your light on.
Yeah, so I guess what's unclear to me, could you just, as a point of clarification, given this this succession structure, is it the understanding that the person who's the incident commander, that person cannot be gone the same time that you're going, correct? So I guess what ends up happening, if it's possible, and I don't know Ms. Kohler's track record with attendance at work or whatever, but if it were to happen that both of you are gone, how are we just to interpret that, or is that a different scenario than the emergency piece? So for me, the incident commander. So if Superintendent Johnson, you're gone, Ms. Kohler is gone, kind of. Does that need to be in place, kind of how you understand it, or not necessarily? Or is it the agreement that neither one of you have to be here at the same point?
That's a great question. And what I was able to ascertain from other districts, some districts had it listed, most districts did not have it listed. What would typically happen, and this has happened, let's say in the summertime or over vacations or such, is if I were to be gone, it's very possible that Kim Kohler might be gone we might have the same vacation day. We would then check who would be available. Now, that did not happen necessarily this summer, but I would always check I would check with Maida about other executive team members' availability. I think we would go, or what I had seen in other districts is we would go, okay, when we have a vacation or a very brief break in communication, who might be in the district but on vacation. So we'd probably determine who's in the building first, but that could be something very, very brief and very quick, because, for example, when I was on a vacation, contacted Maida, I will be gone for X days. If Kim's available and in the district, that's fantastic. We'll keep that structure. But once again, a great question.
Commissioner Lyons.
Is this plan readily accessible to other members of the community? I wouldn't want an Alexander Haig issue where there's some confusion into who's in charge. So
No, it's a good question, and I had placed this, and I think we can, after tonight's meeting, I believe we can state this, is that I have shared this, and there will be a copy, I believe, and I think it's established, right? I think it's placed in this document. First of all, this has been shared with the board. Secondly, this has been shared with the executive team electronically. I've also shared this with our system leaders, so it's available, and there will be a copy in, I believe, the superintendent's office for use as well.
So no additional comments or question. The next step is for us to accept the report and discuss it amongst ourselves for compliance. So the motion that we will start with is just a clean motion of accept and approve. That means that we approve Superintendent Johnson's assessment, in this case compliant. If the board feels that there are issues that need to be dealt with, then we can amend that by excluding certain portions of the report. Either something is unreasonable or the data is not, enough for us to judge whether or not the district truly is in compliance. And then by board action, we could exclude. If something were to be excluded, we would want to immediately decide when will we remonitor it. It may or may not happen with this one. We put this one first because it is the most, I think, straightforward of the operational expectations, but I wanted to make it clear. And of course, this is a learning for all of us. So certainly any procedural questions in this case would be appropriate. It's also the time once we take it and discuss that if board members had feedback or, praise or criticism of something like that would be appropriate. Again, I was doing the reading today just to make sure it's fresh. So if there were, comments or additional feedback that you wanted to give to Superintendent Johnson at that time, but the discussion is for us at that point. So again, the motion that we'll start with is to accept and approve OE 14. And then I will go to Commissioner Harder for a question. Maybe before we
You can see the quizzical look on my face.
Yeah.
Well, I share some concerns that Commissioner Johnson brought up about this being a succession plan. And just, I guess I had in my mind this idea of, this person will be first to try and.
Let me wait, and that will come on discussion of the motion. So it sounds like what you want to do is talk about it. So
Sure.
I think it's more appropriate that because right now it is not ours, it is still the superintendent. So if we accept and approve before we vote on that during the discussion period is when we can have that.
I guess it's the approval I didn't understand.
Yeah, so it's starting with a clean motion that we won't do anything with it, and then by amendment. So if you're unsatisfied with it and you'd like to move to strike that portion, or we could also, you could move to amend the motion to exclude the entirety of the report, return it back to Superintendent Johnson. So yeah, it's like we did with the handbook items. We move to accept the whole thing, and then if there are pieces that we want to work on, and ultimately the handbook went through as it was, but it was the same process. So at this point, then I think it's appropriate to ask for a motion to accept and approve OE 14.
So moved.
Second. All right. Discussion on the motion. Commissioner Harder.
Well, yeah, as I mentioned, I do have some concerns about just in my conception of this. It would be a little bit more of a playbook type format. In case of Superintendent Johnson's unavailability in Polar, then maybe having some others to go to, so that maybe speaking somewhat to some form of guarantee of availability. The absence of those at the top of the succession. So I don't know if I'm misconceptualizing this though, but that's sort of what I was anticipating.
Well, I will note that reading of our policy says that the superintendent will designate at least one other executive staff member. And so one does fit for compliance with what we've written. If that were an issue that we wanted to take up, we would we wanted to mandate that it be more than one line of succession. It sounded to me like Superintendent Johnson, if he and Ms. Kohler were out, that it would be more of a who is available to fill in rather than a set line of command. So, but I think by the way that we've written the policy, it does just ask for at least, it does say at least, but if it's going to be required, then we need to change the language of the policy. But you're also within, you could motion to amend the report. Or even amend the policy, probably, although not within this current motion. You can do that. Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, I guess are we, what's the certainty that, so all of the individuals listed on, so I'm just, my other concern would be of all the other contacts below, there's an actual person. So like, are these all filled positions? Like, so what does it say?
You're looking at
So if we go down, just take the finance section leader, right? And so who's the staffing lead? Is that an actual person?
Correct.
Like-
That would be, and Executive Director Marks could nod her head or she could shake her head in disagreement, but in that position, she would be the staffing lead.
All right, and then like if we were to go, the academic division lead and then the teacher leaders, we have designated people and all those. So, because it's kind of one of those things, is this just a title that falls under these, but are these direct people that would be able to?
Well, I would believe in it. I wouldn't mind if Executive Director Kohler could share a little bit as well. It could be both. There could be multiple people. But Kim, because you have extensive knowledge and use of this back from March, working with Dr. Hardebeck on it, I'd like you, I was able to experience this past year when we had, for example, an operations section leader, and we had everybody in the room and all of those kind of subdivisions, principals, APs, district policy, the person who is responsible for that. But if Executive Director Kohler could share a little bit more insight, maybe that would help a bit more. Dr. Johnson.
So incident command is meant to be very organic, and it should expand as you need more people, and it should shrink as you need fewer people. So one of the things that incident command is not is it's typically not position based or person based. Because it grows and shrinks with whatever incident you have at the time. So as an example, well, these are certainly things that we may have, depending on, depending on the scenario. I can see right now the planning section. So perhaps at the time we wouldn't need the assessment division for whatever scenario we're talking about, right? Then that piece simply wouldn't be within the system. But as soon as we need assessment, do we have somebody that can jump in and be the, part of the assessment division and lead that division? We do. So we have people who can jump in and lead each of these. And then, and then it's just a matter of what is the incident and what are the needs at the time of the incident. So can we fill each position? The answer is yes. Will we immediately need each position? I think the answer to that is we can't tell until we're actually in the scenario.
Could I ask a follow-up?
So yes, I do want to, we are supposed to be discussing just whether or not the district is in compliance. And so I think this maybe pushes quite a little bit of an edge of, I think that these questions probably were better fits for before we had the motion on the table. But I think because this is a learning process, and I don't want to cut off any questions on the first one, I think definitely go ahead.
No, that's okay. I will follow up with Ms. Kohler and Superintendent Johnson with my particular concerns, and I will include my fellow commissioners on my questioning. Thank you.
And again, I just want to be thinking about the process as we go, but I'm certainly open to having that discussion at this point too. I don't want to shut down any questions. I'm just thinking about process. But you're okay? Okay. Commissioner Clements.
So the document is titled Emergency Incident Command Structure, and the heading is Superintendent Succession Structure. So I assume we have an emergency incident command structure that does not involve the superintendent being incapacitated. It's an emergency, there's a tornado, there's any number of things. I just want to make sure that we're we're clear this is separate and apart from that handbook or however that program is stipulated, correct?
That is correct. And again, I will ask Executive Director Kohler to discuss this. I think part of this was when the structure had been set forth in March. I think we knew that COVID was not going to be done by July 1st when I started the position as the new superintendent. So I'm just looking over once again to Kim because I was not here when those discussions happened with Dr. Hardebeck. But Kim, could you please share?
Sure. So, Commissioner Clemens, I think the question was, do we use incident command outside of superintendent succession? And we do. It's actually used in a crisis situation. Incident command is also used. It's a structure that's used nationally across governmental entities for lots of situations. So are we familiar with the model? Yes. Do we use it in other situations? Yes. And then why perhaps was this where we landed in the spring? Was Dr. Hardebeck knew that the transition with COVID or the planning with COVID would kind of span the transition between superintendents. And so this is the model that offered us consistency as Dr. Hardebeck retired and Superintendent Johnson joined the team. And so this was the consistent structure over the course of really 4 months that allowed the district to continue to plan and to have essentially a model that worked all of last year, even through a transition in superintendency. Did I answer your question, Commissioner Clemens?
Yes.
So again, this would be one of those questions that would be, before we take it on, like, again, we're not going to shut this down because we're all learning this, but as we think about how do we operate in the system, these are the kind of feedback or the questions or the needing more information should happen prior to us accepting it. Now, our goal here is to discuss amongst ourselves whether or not we agree that the district is compliant with the policy as currently written. And then, again, feedback or criticism is probably, it says, in the book suggests that that's appropriate, but that's not back and forth discussion. So again, but if we need to have more questions, that's obviously fine. We're all learning, so no big deal.
I think the cautionary tale here though is once you say that we adopt it actually, and then we can discuss, then everything's still back on the table. Or what has to be made clear there moving forward is that our adoption of what we just did is just what you're telling us that we can and cannot do at this particular point in time. So that motion should be that actually we accept this OE 14 as written, and now the school board owns it just to discuss as it's written. So, because I guess for me, as I continue to hear some of the questions, then I guess we should not have actually called the original question. But
We haven't called any question yet. The motion is still on the table.
No, we approved actually what was presented, and now for ownership.
We're only in the motion. It's been motioned to approve it. We have not voted and taken any action at this point. So we are now in exactly what you're saying, which is the time to discuss it. We need a clean motion to have something to discuss. And if we can amend it by rejecting portions of it, or we can send it back and find it not in compliance. But we're in exactly the phase you're talking about, where we should be discussing amongst ourselves. Here's our policy that we have written. Is the district in compliance with what we've asked of them? The motion is on the table, but we have not acted on the motion to approve it at this point. It has been suggested that we do so by a motion and a second, but we're now able to discuss. I for one would say that they are in fact compliant with what we've written here, but that's the discussion point that we're at.
But what you're saying though, this discussion is only on the compliance. The discussion is not on the concerns that we particularly had. So what I'm saying
with Superintendent Johnson or the exec team would be prior to that motion.
Yep. So what I'm saying is we actually in hindsight, and next time is that actually we allow for more time for actually asking the questions.
Yes, and that is certainly on me, or maybe I didn't give enough wait time before I moved on. So you're absolutely right. Then that is my responsibility as the chair to ensure that we get those questions out. And of course, ours to ask them, but sometimes you don't know what your questions are until they don't. So I take responsibility for that. I'm trying to work through it as well, and we'll certainly get better at it. But yes, the discussion point between questions or comments for Superintendent Johnson and the exec team should be before the motion. And yes, I already have a note here of when it comes down to what is one thing that we could do better tonight. Well, that's been my thing that I've already jotted down. But I hope and I will, we'll be flexible as we learn into it as well. So go ahead.
So ensuring the compliance, are you going to include some of the information that you discussed during the last school board in terms of kind of those dates and or times in which this particular plan was in place throughout is that what we could expect to be in the monitoring report, that I was gone during this particular period of time, and and this is when it was implemented? And
There are districts who have done that, and I would be willing to do that when I am out of the district for X amount of days, conference in Madison. And then, because as I felt I was, the district is compliant, we are compliant in this based on my interpretation of the board policy. One person where that's correct. For example, I were to go to a WASB seminar in Madison, I would then have Executive Director Kohler as the person who would be that next in the succession. When I am unavailable, I'm out of the district, 3 hours away.
I also believe that you're in compliance. As I see this plan is a living, breathing animal that could change and would not come back to the board for reapproval. What we're receiving, what we're approving is that the plan exists and it's out there and accessible to individuals that want to know in succession how this works and what the ground rules are. So I believe that this meets 14, and I would call the question.
Before we do, I will just open it to any other questions, because again, we're all working through. I want to make sure that we do have that time. I know we're a little out of Robert's rules, and I'm sure he's turning in his resting place. Yes, wherever that may be, I don't. So any other comments or questions? Again, if we need to have more questions for the executive team and Superintendent Johnson, I think that's okay right now. All right, I gave extra wait time there. Hearing none, the question is called to accept and approve OE 14 as compliant. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. And I will include some of this, some of the questions and feedback in the summary statement that is written there. Commissioner Harder, Dr. Johnson, et cetera. So we'll then move on to our next order of business. That's matters reserved for board action. Tonight we have some proposed updates to the board work calendar. Dr. Bika, myself, and I might have been Commissioner Clements, I'm not sure, the third was in agenda setting when we asked for this to go forward, had asked for the executive team to suggest calendar items that were necessary for the budget section specifically, and other business. And then the request was specifically around the referendum. We know that we have a lot of work there, and having it on our board calendar makes it so that we're able to move forward. I believe those are the items that are in red on the board calendar. And as an aside, Dr. Johnson, I am jealous of your oversized printing. I'm going to have one of those for myself, because I would like to have it where I wasn't squinting at my screen. So did it again. I'm very jealous. I'll turn it over to Abby just for a brief, 1 to 2 minutes, and maybe Kim. if you want to add something in, I did just talk to Abby about it, just to talk about the process that you went through here and what we're kind of seeing, just very briefly, we've all been preparing.
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner Rodine. Basically, we looked through this document to try to figure out what was important to know for the referendum. So that way then there could be things put on board members' calendars and knowing if it's an event that you would need to attend, or if it would be coming to you in the form of a report to the full board, or if it would be a report in the form of a memo to keep you informed on what we're working on. So we took the timeline for the referendum that the board approved and tried to put it into this format. So that way then it was on your radar and there wouldn't be any surprises and you kind of knew what to expect going forward as far as the board meetings go. As far as the budget goes, again, I just took a quick peek at the budget because those are very rigid timelines and making sure that you are aware of when that would be coming to the board. And that's kind of that cyclical event. So, you know, even if you look at tonight's meeting, and the other business, we'll be presenting a report as far as referendum and capital needs. So you can see that we noted that that was going to be a report and that would be a report to the full board. Kim, did you have anything to add? Okay. Thanks.
So we had asked for that division of what is, because we know from looking at that referendum timeline that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but a lot of that can come to the board via emails or written memos so that we can process that information and we want to use the time here. We need to have that information face to face. So tonight our goal is to discuss these particular changes and then the board decides its own work schedule, but the administrative team has a better feel for the timeline. And I know budget development works on that timeline as well and discusses it quite a bit. And so then we could decide to act and add these to the board calendar. Things like reports would be more of a due date that we would have them by that time. And then, events, especially as we look down to, kind of community listening sessions later on in the proposed year, that would not necessarily be on, for example, February 7th, March 7th, and March 21st, but around those times, it's kind of a guidepost for when we want to be having those events. So they are tied to board meeting nights, but that's simply because our calendar is set that way. Those things would not necessarily be on the same night as the meeting. So at this time, I guess I'll open it for any discussion or questions or changes that would be proposed to what is here. Again, we're just working on the proposed changes in red. Wade, I will say thank you to Maida and to Patty Iverson, to Abby and Kim, Superintendent Johnson, everybody else that worked on putting this all together, having a calendar to help us know what's going on and in one place will be invaluable as we move towards our planned referendum in November of 22. And having it on here will give us some idea of when we're in agenda setting of how to make time so that we can be effective. So thank you for that work. So any comments or questions, any proposed changes? Otherwise, I guess I would hear a motion to approve the changes to the board work calendar.
Move to approve them.
Second.
So moved and seconded, but then we'll go to Dr. Johnson about the motion, or you can get in here. So if you've got, we can always amend the motion too.
So this is only specific to the referendum for the board work calendar, all the information included on it.
The changes that we are considering tonight are the ones in red. The other is the already adopted board work calendar. So if there were changes in the black that you would like to suggest, we'd have to put it on a future meeting agenda to consider them. So we do have a motion to approve the changes and a second. Is there discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of approval of the changes to the board work calendar, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. And then we'll look forward to going through and seeing a lot more work on our docket. And we'll look forward to those reports coming in as well. We now move on to board development. Tonight we have a presentation from Kim and Abby regarding identification of district needs and our planning session. This is the first of our work sessions regarding the referendum to give us more information about the district needs and give us ideas to think about what we may choose to include in our referendum. So Kim and Abby.
And I do not need to turn this on any longer, correct?
Correct.
So Maida is going to drive the PowerPoint. I'll let her know when we need it to move to the next one. So good evening. Tonight, Abby and I would like to talk to you about current facility needs across the district, thinking particularly in light of some of the referendum information that you had just discussed. So some of the needs that we're going to share have been studied by the Demographic Trends and Facility Planning Committee. And I'd like to share those with you tonight. One being a recommendation that you've already heard, and another being probably an upcoming recommendation within the next few months. So maybe you can click. Thank you. In the past year, the committee has studied both the expansion at the elementary level and at the high school level. And tonight I'd like to share an overview of that work. Maida, if you could click. You might remember that when we redrew elementary boundaries a few years back, the committee was not able to balance enrollment at all elementary schools. Mans, Meadowview, and Putnam Heights remained a concern for the committee after redrawing those boundaries. You can see on the chart here that prior to the pandemic, Meadowview and Putnam Heights were both over 90% capacity for several years, and that's highlighted in red on the chart. In the last 2 years, and in those previous years, Mans teetered around 90% capacity. In the last 2 years, enrollment has declined at those schools, and you can see in those last couple of columns in 2021 and 21-22 that those schools are no longer in red. We believe that this is directly correlated to the pandemic, and what the committee is committed to doing is to monitoring that enrollment and adjusting any recommendations as needed. So the recommendation that was made previously stands, and the committee will just continue to monitor to see if those pop back up into red, and we keep that recommendation, or if they stay in yellow or orange, what that might mean for the recommendation. Maida, if you could, thank you. You might recall last year in July of 2020, the committee shared with the board that they studied 4 possible expansion options at the elementary level. Option number 1 was to build a new school. Option number 2 was to place additions at Mans, Meadowview, and Putnam Heights. Option 3, additions just at Meadowview and Putnam Heights. And option 4 was an addition just to Meadowview. So you can see there what the benefits of each were, what some of the challenges were, estimated costs, and how many additional seats they would add. After weighing all of this information, Maida, if you could click, based on their analysis, the Demo and Trends Committee recommended that we have additions to Mans, Meadowview, and Putnam Heights as a long-term solution to relieve elementary crowding within the district. Again, post-pandemic, enrollment will be monitored, and this recommendation could be modified if needed. Most recently, the committee has been studying expansion at the high school level. You can see on this slide that high school enrollments, also from 2015 to present, are concerning, especially at North High School. If you follow North High School from 2015, even through the pandemic, you can see that it's creeping up to 93.6%. This year it's projected to be at 96.9%. And when we look at APL projections beyond this year, having North above 90% is expected to last over the next several years. So even with potentially an impact on enrollment due to the pandemic, we're not seeing relief, so to say, at North High School. It is still a concern. Although Memorial is in a more comfortable spot at currently 84 or 83%, the age of the building and the configuration of the school does leave some concerns as well. So the committee is exploring those options, which we'll see on the next slide. The options that the committee is exploring at both North and Memorial include some sort of renovation or expansion of the commons area. For example, if all students at our high schools wanted to eat lunch at school, we would not be able to serve them. We do not have enough room in either of the cafeterias. So we really almost have to bank on kids leaving for lunch in order for everybody to be fed. So that's something that's been discussed at Demo and Trends. Additionally, at North High School, the committee is exploring options to add classroom space. And so we're currently exploring how many classrooms that might be, where in the building those classrooms may be able to be added, and what would the cost of an additional space for classrooms look like. Nate, if you could click, this slide shows you the timeline of the committee's work around that high school recommendation. So the committee really began to dig deep into high school in the spring of 2021. In August and September, they'll study kind of the benefits and challenges and costs related to several options that have been created. And we anticipate sometime late fall or early winter that we'll finalize a recommendation and have that recommendation ready to present to the board regarding high schools. And with that, I will turn it over to Abby, who's going to talk about capital improvement projects.
Good evening. So we have identified a couple of buildings that have had needs, and they've been on many of our radar for several years. You will remember that in our 2016 referendum, South Middle School was discussed, as well as Roosevelt Elementary School. South Middle School, just as a reminder, it needs an upgrade like we did in DeLong in 2011. South is about 10 years newer than the DeLong building, and you get to a certain age in the building, 40 to 50 years, and you kind of just need to redo it. And so that's really the point that South Middle School is at right now. In 2016, that was projected to be a cost of around $22 million. The cost would be different today, and the layout might look different than it did, back in 6 years ago, because we've learned a lot about facilities and things change over that time as well. And then Roosevelt, the high needs there are really the roofing, the windows, and the gym floor. There's other things that need to be considered at Roosevelt. And so those were the things that were highlighted back in the 2016 referendum when the board decided to kind of really go with that operational question. We could only go so many dollars because we wanted that to pass. And the cost of these two projects, made that referendum amount so large that the board was concerned that it wouldn't pass at that time. So that's why those two were kind of set aside during the 2016 referendum. Can you please go forward? Goodness gracious. There we go. Thank you. So the other thing that we look at as far as capital improvements go, if you want to move on to the next slide, is just where are buildings at in terms of deferred maintenance. And so deferred maintenance would be considered roofs and parking lots, HVAC system replacement, HVAC controls, exterior doors, windows, flooring, tuck pointing, ADA compliance, as well as fire alarm system. Now, we did a lot of this work with the 2016 referendum. If you'll remember, we had about $25 million that we borrowed to get a lot of those projects up to compliance. But, fast forward 6-7 years, and some of those things that we didn't do at that point are now in times needing to be done. So I didn't give you specific buildings. I just wanted to give you a high level of things that are currently being evaluated and what might come forward as we continue down this road of identifying what those needs are for a potential referendum. And so with that, Kim and I are happy to answer any questions that you have for us at this time.
And Kim, thank you for the updates. I'm sure that there are questions, so I'll open the floor to questions. Commissioner Harder and then Dr. Johnson, and then Commissioner Lyons.
Yeah, thanks for this report. This is really interesting information. And I especially was glad to see the option at the elementary level versus building a new school, the difference in costs and the difference in seats. It's great to see that potential. I wonder if there's similar. Actually, I have two questions. One is about the high schools. We rebalanced north a few years back, as I recall. The idea of balancing the enrollment between high schools and how important that was from an equity standpoint. It looks like we've overshot a little bit up north. And I wonder if there's an adjustment to that policy. I think we were doing redirecting open enrollment students, and I think there were maybe a couple other smaller measures that were taken too, but is it time to revisit those?
So we did in January of 2021, when we discussed open enrollment, we reopened Memorial, hoping that it would relieve some of the pressure that you see within the presentation at North High School. I do think you can draw a direct correlation to when boundaries were changed and to when North started to feel kind of the crunch of enrollment in their facility. North has a capacity that is roughly 200 students fewer than Memorial. So that's one of the things that the committee is looking at. So Memorial can comfortably seat, I believe it's 1,700. And North is closer to 1,500. So by adding some classrooms, we're hoping to end up with high schools that have at least the same capacity. And it would provide the relief then that North would need. I'm not sure, Abby, you were on demo and trends when the boundaries were changed. We try to keep boundaries in place for a number of years. I think that's most palatable to the community. And so I don't know how many years it's been.
Let's see, I was just looking at that. I think that the first year of the change was, I think it was 17-18. So the goal of the committee at that point in time was 5 years of a stable, for the next 5 years, this would be a good fit. And so we're just about right at that 5-year mark.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense. Balancing, now we're faced with the challenge of balancing capacity, not just balancing the enrollment, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a good way.
So then my other question was about the capital improvement projects, and I understand it's a lot more varied and less certain, but is there any kind of a scale, dollar figure number that has been wrapped around that yet to get a sense of size for the capital improvement pieces?
no, not yet. I mean, I think, like I said, South and Roosevelt have kind of been on the radar, and then, the Buildings and Grounds crew is working on others. One thing that we did before the 2011 capital referendum is we had a facility study done of all of our buildings. And so that might be something that the board would direct us to do again. It's probably something good practice to do every 10 years, because that really kind of helps you know what are those red hot spots as far as those big facility needs. And so, that study was done in 2010. And so, we're pushing to the 11-12 year mark. So that might be something that the board would want to consider. That would also probably help provide accurate information. We don't have we have specialists, but we don't see the building as a whole. And so that's why I think it's helpful to have an outside entity come in and really kind of help you identify what those needs are.
How long does that process take typically? Because that seems like it would feed very nicely into our referendum work.
Yes, I guess I haven't investigated it too long and I wasn't part of the 2010 study. What I can tell you right now is that the contractors that did the 2010 study are also our current architects. And so they wouldn't be starting from ground zero because they did that study 10 years ago. If it's something that you would like me to get information on, just like a timeline, I can certainly do that.
It would be great to know if it's possible to have it contribute to our.
Okay, sure, I can follow up with that.
And Commissioner Harder, I would just like to clarify. I did actually find it right in the presentation. North's capacity is 1,700, Memorial's is 1,900. So we would bring both up to 1,900.
Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, I have a few questions. I found it pretty interesting when you talked about the high school pieces, because I guess for me, that expansion of the common areas, when I had an opportunity to visit the high schools this past academic year, what came to light especially was the need actually for classroom size expansion, not necessarily common area expansion. And especially that one wing off of the interest where the majority of like English classes were, the English teachers were just talking about how cool it was that they were moved into these larger classrooms. And that whole wing is the classroom spaces were extremely small. And I guess for me, when we talk about the common area, because the example that you guys gave about not being able to have all the students eat lunch if need be, given the Hy-Vee with Wahlburgers and everything else, I'm pretty sure actually the Clovers may be a little bit upset by Hy-Vee coming in there with that and Panda just being across the street. I'm not sure we'll ever get to a capacity where we'll have all of high schoolers wanting to eat lunch, unless I have not had a lunch at Memorial. Maybe it's pretty awesome, but I'm not sure I would pass up on Wahlburgers or Panda. And so if we could consider potentially, as you guys are talking in your group, of looking instead of the common area, potentially kind of reevaluating potentially like a classroom sizes, especially on that one. It was significant that the principals and the teachers made note that the class sizes are extremely smaller on that wing of the building comparative to everyone else. So I would just ask that you consider that in your further discussion. And the two questions that I had in terms of the deferred maintenance, as you are looking at the deferred maintenance, and this particularly as it relates to the HVAC system, can we, when you're looking at costs and information, can we include additional costs that HVAC system replacement align with the latest standards to improve indoor air quality that also serve as mitigation strategies for airborne pathogens moving forward? And I don't know what your building and ground committee, but there was a great report, the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, ASHRAE, included guidance and standards for HVACs in the schools, not post-pandemic moving forward. And we think about it as a mitigating strategy, but also just overall indoor air quality for the health of our students and our staff. So if we could have that included in your particular discussion. And then my, I guess those are two comments. The question is, what accessibility areas are under consideration in that deferred maintenance under ADA compliance? Or we're just talking about like the physical components like entry and exit ways, bathrooms, or other components, or like what goes into that ADA compliance? Because typically there's 3 levels that most public and private entities, you do bare minimum, and then you try to a middle of the road, and then this top. So I'm just curious, do we have, as a school district in the past, what's their extent of ADA compliance, and is it just relegated to just the physical space? Is that what we're talking about?
Most of it is the physical space. Yeah, there could be some other things on the list. We did do some of this work with the 2016 referendum as well, but there's the physical space as far as restrooms and, classroom accessibility, common space. One of the things in our building was signage. and putting up signs that had Braille on it as well. So I think it's just each building might not be in exactly the same spot. And so if there's some of those things that we haven't finalized, we would like to, that's just one of the things that hits that list. And as far as the HVAC question, yeah, that is one of the things that's on our list to review for using our ESSER funds as well.
Because I know that was a component that they said that really allowed. And just back to the physical, just one more click. If we could, is just look beyond just the typical entry, exit way, bathroom accessibility and signage, but in terms of even walking into, say, an office space, the main office space of a facility, and realizing that actually the desk is at a height. So for wheelchair users, individuals, we would have to be able to just be, be a little bit more considerate in that aspect as well in terms of redesign. So thank you.
Commissioner Lyons.
Yeah, great presentation. I think that we've always done a really good job at looking at demographic and trends, and I was really honored to be a part of that process that was here well before me. And I'm looking at these numbers and I'm remembering some of those conversations, because I'm looking especially at the elementary expansion and the 3 red bars and then 2 red bars. And then I look further down and I'm not seeing any red anymore. And I know that part of that is some of the work that Demo Trends did. But I also know that because I worked at a university, that there's this demographic cliff that's coming up where we're going to be dropping quite a few head count of students this age. And I'm wondering if that's not coming down the pike. And I'm wondering if there isn't an impact from the virtual school that we have as well. And that makes me wonder, from the elementary expansions and some of the things that you put out, whether there's really a compelling reason here to look at the elementary school expansion. So it's a question of numbers and dollars. So that's one question. And I have always been really concerned, and I don't think we do as good a job at looking at that deferred maintenance. And I know that in the budget presentation, I think that you were spending about $3 million on deferred, not even that.
No, we increased it this year to 1.8. We had 1.86.
So I know what the university spent on deferred maintenance, and that's a shockingly low number. And I remember in that referendum, I remember South being talked about during the referendum. And I think that there was some HVAC issues, and I think there was a boiler, that the boiler might have been original to the building.
Could be.
And I was thinking, if that boiler blows up, that building's taken out of commission for a period of time. And I don't know if it's a charge that's given to Demo and Trends, but the amount of money that's being directed to deferred maintenance, and you quoted $22 million for South, and it's a newer building than Mann's. Well, I mean, my question was immediately, well, what shape is Mann's in? And so weighing the two of the deferred maintenance versus the renovation of buildings, I'm really more focused over on the deferred maintenance, because I think there's probably, just anecdotally, more of a need there, because I've seen what we're spending. So I'll stop there because it's a long question.
I think it's a good question, and you make a good point. I think the good news is that with our 2016 referendum, we were able to catch up a lot of that deferred maintenance that had kind of fallen behind, $25 million worth, which doesn't take long to get to those dollars, that. And so that's part of what we're compiling right now is, okay, this year's capital improvement plan was focused on the culinary labs. And so that was almost $1 million of our $1.8 million budget, and then the year before, it was kind of the same thing. We've had some pretty big projects. And so we haven't crossed off as many of those things because we've been focused on some other things. I do think that the boiler at South, I think they redid part of it or something recently. It sounds a little bit familiar, but yeah, it's definitely a concern because there's a lot of, that space could be better utilized, I think. There's some things that just don't work well anymore for it. And so that really kind of needs that facelift and upgraded.
I think if I could just respond to the demographics of the committee, and Commissioner Clements, if you want to chime in at any time, certainly, probably you know more about city growth than any of us here, but we had, if you recall last fall, we asked the University of Wisconsin Applied Populations Lab to conduct a study, and they did. And so, you know, I think it's good, reliable data, minus the impact of COVID, which they acknowledged as a challenge. So they ran it with last year's enrollment data, but then they pulled also that data out just kind of as an outlier because so many districts across the state experienced changes in enrollment due to COVID. So we do project continuing growth in some areas more than in other areas. There is that kind of flattening as far as birth rate or students of a certain age. Another thing that's very challenging, and Commissioner Clements, maybe this is where you can speak to it a little bit, is just the growth of our area and the rate of expansion in Eau Claire is a little bit harder to predict. So I don't remember, Commissioner Clements, if you were the one that said we've grown more in the last 5 years than we had the 50 years prior. Is that correct?
I don't remember, but that's reasonable.
So maybe it was Ryan who said that. It was some smart demographer somewhere that had said that. And so that makes it challenging because then you're trying to predict who's moving into the city. So I agree with you. It's something that we need to watch. And I think given that those are in yellow and orange now rather than red, certainly on the committee's radar.
Commissioner Clements.
Thank you, President Nordine. So I had two comments. I'll rearrange them based on your comments. One of those is making sure that we are investing capital, resources in capital where we, purposely where we want to go and not where we've been. And the numbers in enrollment are where we've been. Those are lagging indicators in the community. Whereas if, for example, we need to anticipate where our new household is going to be formed, and that's where things get pretty fuzzy pretty quickly. And the Applied Population Lab study, and I was trying to find it here, looks at current households, who lives here now, and then based upon their, statistical models, when are they likely to have children and how many and stuff like that. It doesn't really account for people who are coming into the community. And so that's where we have to look at other indicators as to where's growth happening, where households turning over, aging out, and your households coming in. But then investing kind of resources in where we want the community to grow, and that is somewhat outside of the school district's purview. But I think it's a good opportunity for us to recognize that the district is just one many institutions which is involved in the long-term prosperity of the region. We need to work with them to determine where should we be investing in our facilities, where the city's trying to encourage growth. People do chase the new school building or the newest renovation. People do that. I work with people, for example, who live in the city of Altoona because they want to be in a newer building, for example. And anecdotally, before I moved here, I lived in Dubuque, Iowa, which has substantially higher need situations than Eau Claire. And their district, I think very, very wisely, they replaced their an older building in their highest need, in their highest need part of the district. It wasn't a place where, if you just looked at a map and say, where's the new development happening? We need to chase it. They said, no, this is the neighborhood that needs it most now. And that's where they put their money into a new school. And that totally, over time, has transformed that part of the city because people see that the institutions are investing there. They're not chasing, new development elsewhere. And so I think that's important to consider when we think about where we're investing capital resources, because those are long-term durable decisions. And the other question I had relates to what I see is coming up on our schedule, is OE3, our environment and climate. We haven't seen that yet, but I really want to emphasize that we should be looking at the referendum as a way to implement that strategy. Otherwise, we're unlikely to have those resources. We're only spending 1.5 or 1.6 million on deferred maintenance. Like those objectives that go beyond instruction will never be achieved unless we include them in something like a referendum. And so I'm really encouraging you to think ambitiously about how we can achieve all those things in that OE3 policy. There's lots of really excellent resources that are out there. There's some good examples of recent investments in the state on new and renovated buildings. And I would encourage us to really think about that.
Thank you.
So I have a few comments or questions, and I think they're going to basically tie into a lot of the things that my colleagues have been talking about. Commissioner Harder, to your question about looking at the balancing of the high school enrollments, if I remember correctly, the rebalancing district line was the first big project that I worked on Demo and Trends. We have a lot of former Demo and Trends members here. And if I may be misremembering, but I feel like in our projection, we saw there was going to be a point where North was in fact ahead of Memorial in terms of population for a while, as Memorial would fill from faster expansion by the APL. And it was about 5 years down the line. And look at that. We actually worked it out and it worked. I think that's a testament to the work that the Demo and Trends continues to do. But the people that have been on it for many years, I was there for a couple, but there's been a core that has stayed for a long time and have really helped to make that effective. So, and now if you look at, well, could we rebalance again? Well, if we took somehow and we rebalanced North down to 90%, that would increase Memorial up to 90%. And then we've got two buildings at 90%. So that, the solution now isn't functional. We almost have to do something facilities wise. I guess my one question that I have, well, one, can you remind me what the amount of the 2016 referendum was again, the total amount?
The grand total?
Yes.
Or the yearly total?
Yeah, the grand total.
I think the grand total was like 87.9 million.
Yeah, and that is sort of that was just after we had moved here. I will, I guess, echo Commissioner Clements for sitting here open is OE3, because I think this is the place where we can really make that. We have the board has committed and the district has committed to that 2050 goal. And the only way that we're going to really have that impact. And I think it goes along also with some of Dr. Johnson's comments. If we're looking at HVAC, the efficiency is not only going to help energy consumption wise, but also air quality wise. And we just went through how many days of watching smoke blow in from out west. Like air quality is a real concern and it goes beyond just the current pandemic. And I think there's a way to tie in our climate commitment to that. So I will just echo, I hope to see that when the plan comes out. I think first draft is in about 6 weeks. I think it's on the board work calendar for the 13th of September, that meeting. So then if I just add up the costs of what we have 22 million for South.
That's
it's going to be low. So, but let's be, yeah. So I wrote down 30 million with a question mark here just to spitball something. But if we just go with 22, right, and 16 million, which I think is a very pleasantly low number after one of the last things I did on Demo and Trends was looking at the costs of a new building. So 16 feels like a real bargain. If we look at then 25 million in deferred maintenance, that's what we did last time. And again, you didn't put a number on it, so I'm not putting words in your mouth. But if that was the case, right, and if I feel like Roosevelt at one point was looking at around 3 million, maybe 5 million now. I mean, even if I just take 22, that puts us at $68 million. And that's without high school expansion on either side, whether it's the common area or classrooms at Memorial, and we certainly need classrooms at North. And I also think that there is something to be said for considering an operational component, because we have operational needs that may be best served by that. And I'm not certain what all of those are. I know I hear things and I talk with people, and you probably know some of them right off the top of your head. That would be great if we had that. So I think we just need to be cognizant of, can we sneak by with only doing 2? I'd like to do all 3, but can we save, 5 million there to put it towards that deferred maintenance? That's something that I think that we as a board would do well to consider. How can we, and to think about the operational piece. And I think, looking at coming up, we have that question of, do we need an outside company to help us survey the community? And I know that question comes up on our now official work calendar, but my answer right away is absolutely we need to know that. We need to know what will our community support, because we have to balance our wish list with the reality of that. And one final thing is, Kim, you mentioned that Demo and Trends is going to monitor, and it's related to when is the last possible day that we can know what those numbers are? Because we're really only looking at maybe getting 1 additional year of enrollment data. And will we be able to get that in time to fit it into the overall picture of a referendum?
Sure. So the numbers that you see in each year prior to 21-22 either came from third Friday, September, or second Friday, January, kind of our official numbers for enrollment. So I would say third Friday in September, we will count children in seats. It usually takes us a few weeks to solidify that. So I would say by mid-October, the first meeting in November, we would have at least where things stand officially at that point in time.
For the projected, that's the final column of that slide, right?
Right now, they're just projected. So Justin and I update them. We get a report from the enrollment office every week, and we just continually update those numbers to look at them. We'll have a final cutoff of the third Friday, and that will then become our official number for the school year.
Is there a chance to get I don't know and Abby, maybe you remember this from the actual timeline, when we have to set what's in the question, dollar, and do we, this is my first go through on a referendum, do we just set a dollar amount, or do we have to specify then what the actual projects are that it's going to be used for? So is there a chance to get another year of data on those 3 or 4 schools?
Not in time to the referendum. So the referendum question has to be adopted in August of 2022. And so
that projection, but we won't have.
Yeah. We won't know.
That was just helpful, because you say, well, we're going to monitor it and we'll let you know. Well, I would be shocked if it was radically different from what was projected. But it's something for me to be thinking about. Thank you for all those points. Dr. Bika, did you have anything that you wanted to add? And are there any other additional, now that everybody's had a chance to? Commissioner Clements.
I just wanted to add, just a quick look at the referendum. 2016 was expected to be 87.9 million in 2016 dollars. But I also wanted to say, we mentioned OE3, which I think is really crucial. But another thing that wasn't mentioned is, perhaps I alluded to in terms of geographically, where do we invest in facilities, but how do we advance our equity mission also through capital? We often think about that as primarily an operational staffing issue, but it is a capital issue too. We want to make sure that we're putting resources in buildings where students really need it the most. And that needs to be a part of our consideration in terms of how we do that. I don't know if that will affect the top line number per se. But I do think it does recognize that we think about how do we get resources to accomplish these goals. And this is one of the ways to do that.
Other comments or questions?
Just a quick follow-up on that. I assume this was sort of explicitly excluding the operational component in this report, not because we're not considering it for the referendum, but because this report is relevant to the facilities. Is that correct?
Right. And I think that the challenge that we face is that we haven't determined operational needs fully yet. We really need that third Friday count, and what does our October 15th certification look like? And so Mike and I have been talking quite frequently about what are the needs. We have a list started, but nowhere concrete yet. And so we aren't comfortable coming forward as we work through this budget. Plus, we're still, reconciling 2021. What does 21-22 look like? And so we just feel like it's pretty premature to kind of put out there, here's what we believe our needs are. So.
Right, that makes sense. And I also though didn't notice it on the calendar that the board work calendar updates, any sort of placeholder for that topic of discussion, but I don't know if it's that now, so, but
I mean, we have work sessions or workshops recommended right now on the 20th and the 18th. The 20th or 18th of October that are further identification of school district needs. That doesn't. Yeah. And I wanted to be clear, it was not, I was bringing it up because I was trying to start to spitball how to, when we start adding these numbers together, they get pretty big fast and there's only going to be a certain number that will be our ceiling that we can be successful on. So I was trying to think about where are we, and knowing that I do want to at least consider some operational options because we have those needs as well.
very concerned.
Well, Kib and Abby, thank you. It's a long road up this mountain, but taking steps currently feels good. We'll see how tired our legs are by the end. Thank you. Final agenda item tonight is our board debrief. We assess the performance of ourselves, the board, over this meeting with an eye for improving our practice. Commissioner Harder was the third member of agenda setting, so it falls to you to lead tonight's debrief.
And I believe we typically talk about one thing that each board member liked in tonight's meeting and anything we might do differently.
Or you continue to improve on and did well, but
Right.
something along those lines. Sure.
Yeah, well, I'll start with something we might do differently, that going through the OE 14, obviously we had a little confusion and nailing down that sequencing of board member concerns and discussions and making sure we're all procedurally. I'm not sure I really got our previous procedures down pat, but these new ones are, it's a different story, so but I think we can keep working on that. But I like that we worked through it, and I did feel clearer by the end of our discussions. So that was what do you want to just go down?
Yeah, sure. I think I was actually reflecting on our debriefing from the last meeting. And a thought that I don't quite know how to capture it, but when we have an opinion or an attitude about something, so if I'm, how do I come into these meetings? If I'm feeling very favorable about the new governance model, how should I be thinking about the dynamics that are happening? Or if I'm against, we're not for or against, but we're somewhere on a continuum, And if I tend to be more kind of questioning or skeptical, how are the dynamics going? So I was really trying to think about it tonight from a perspective that I have a lot of questions or concerns about coherent governance. And so the one thing I was thinking about is, did we have enough time? As that was last week, I was thinking, of course, we will always have enough time. It's not even a concern. So now this week I went from the perspective, I'm afraid we're not going to have enough time. So I wondered how that actually played out.
Giving time within a single meeting for all the various pieces of business we have to do over the coming year, or?
No, just time overall. That if this is how it's going to go, each piece, was there enough time for this one? What's it going to be like when there's something that's that much more challenging? Sure. This was a pretty straightforward. John.
I think I particularly had appreciated the opportunity that we had to discuss and have dialogue around the district needs planning session. So one concern I have about our coherent governance is our ability to have those discussions where there's not a decision that's being put before us. Yeah, especially with the removal of some of our things. How do we engage in that discussion. So I appreciated that. I think that the conversations around accepting superintendent reports will get better. I don't think they'll get easier necessarily because they've been relatively easy compared to the ones we'll have. But we're figuring it out, I hope. And these will help us understand how to do them better and have more meaningful conversations about them. So I'm glad we got this one early so that we can work on this before we get to some of the ones that are the heavier content.
So I guess one of the things that I thought ended up going relatively well is we did pick our way through it and we did our work. And I think that was a small step, but it was a step. I certainly, as I said, I will take responsibility as the facilitator, as the chair, to try to make sure that I leave the floor open for additional questions or dialogue between the superintendent and executive team, but also board. I'll ask for everyone's forbearance as we try to figure out when do we have certain bits of conversation. I'm optimistic that we'll be able to have those conversations at the right place, because I think all of us want to make sure that we're as impactful as a board as possible. And I think that this, looking at a policy focus and a results focus, is a way to make us efficient. And we'll have to learn to adjust, and I'll have to do a better job of making sure that I put each of you in a position as much as I can to make sure that your questions and concerns are on the table. One thing that I also think that we need to do thinking about is what's our mechanism for adjusting policy? Like, it's there, but as Commissioner Clements, you said, we don't have the policy and governance committee to run those ideas. So if it were important for us to change it to 2 or more designees, for example, we have to get to a point where we want to change it. And I know, Dr. Bika, there's one in the board superintendent relations that you'd like to talk about. And it's finding, how do we have that conversation? Is it after an adoption of the current one, then we adjust it? We can certainly do it at a time, but these are questions that I'm still thinking about as we go along. And I'll take as much responsibility onto me as I can to try to help facilitate that.
Yeah, I think for me, I still kind of have my concerns. I think kind of with how reports are provided and the amount of information and or the amount of questioning that's remaining afterwards, and potentially not being able to have an avenue to address those at this particular time. And even I'm not sure even having them addressed, via communication otherwise, and so I still have a concern there. I think I'm a realist, so we got through another meeting, so I guess that's a positive, right? So I guess I will implore some of Dr. Bika's thinking is, I will try to look at it if I was one of those individuals that were completely on board with coherent government, which I am not, but I will try to look at it from that particular lens. But I'm just having some reaffirmations about concerns about kind of like the reporting and the ability to address, but we're getting through it. And so any momentum that's forward is good, right? And so that's the perspective that you have to have.
A good thing, every meeting I learn things from all of you. And I'm verbal, and I sometimes will debate things from a position that maybe I don't even fully solidified my belief around, because it helps me think through all of the issues. So to kind of echo maybe something that Josh and Markel said. When I read the reports, I'm only thinking individually. And when you all ask questions, it makes me think about additional questions. And for me, that's what's missing, is that ability to kind of discern some of these things as a group. And we can't do that because if we were emailing each other, it'd be a while. And so we're looking at this individually, and you're all asking questions about things. And then I'm thinking, yeah, I should have thought about that too. And in addition to that, I have this question. And so as we work through the coherent governance, I hope there's more of an opportunity to kind of bounce those kind of agreements or disagreements off one another. Because I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to get is the best decision. And I think that that's the process that helps tease out those good decisions.
Thank you, Commissioner Harder. Thank you, everyone. That brings us to the end of our meeting. I would hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
You're adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the Eau Claire Area School Board.